What's that thing doing in first class? Bianca Harrington, with her perfect platinum blonde hair and a $15,000 Chanel dress, stared at the brown-haired girl in seat 4A as if she'd just found trash in her own place. Adriano Russo, the notorious New York Mafia boss, the man the entire underworld called Il Diavolo, the devil, let his gaze sweep over that woman. A faded old dress, washed so many times it had lost its color, calloused hands, cracked nails, and a little daughter clinging to a battered stuffed bear. He looked at her the way he'd look at a stain on Italian leather. People like this always try to squeeze into places they don't belong. Bianca sniffed. Just look at those hands. Dishwashing hands, obviously. Maybe she slept with somebody to get the ticket? Amelia Parker lifted her head, her voice small but steady. Ma'am, my ticket was purchased by Johns Hopkins Hospital. I was invited to present. Johns Hopkins? Adriano cut in, his deep voice cold, like he was reading out a death sentence. A prestigious hospital invited you? For what? To mop the floor after the conference? The entire first-class cabin laughed. Chloe, a 4-year-old, shrank into her mother's arms, wide-eyed with fear, whispering, Mom, why does that man hate us? Bianca bent down toward Chloe's torn stuffed bear and wrinkled her nose. Adriano, I'm allergic to poverty. Letting people like this sit next to your son is an insult to the Russo family. Adriano nodded to Bruno, his bodyguard and assassin built like a bear. Make sure she doesn't look, doesn't talk, doesn't touch my son. If she does anything. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. He's very creative when it comes to handling things. But then, the 3-year-old sitting in the seat beside Adriano suddenly went limp. His lips turned blue-purple. His eyes rolled back. His breathing stopped. Leo! Adriano roared, and for the first time in his life, the most powerful mafia boss in New York trembled like a child. Chloe tugged at her mother's hand and cried, Mom, that baby looks like me when I got really sick. Mom, save the baby. Amelia stood up. Mr. Russo, he's going into shock. I can. Bianca lunged in, shoving Amelia back down into her seat. Don't touch him. Who do you think you are? A dishwasher trying to lay hands on the heir to the Russo empire? Even in his desperation, the powerful boss barked at her to stay away, unable to believe a woman of her standing could possess the knowledge to save his heir. In 10 fateful minutes, that same man, the most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man who'd killed without blinking, the man who made the underworld shake, would be on his knees in front of the girl he'd just called a lowly kitchen worker, his voice breaking, choked with desperation. Please, save my son. I'll do anything. Anything. And Bianca Harrington, the one who'd just shoved Amelia down, would be forced to witness the thing that would drive her insane. Adriano looked at that girl with calloused hands with an expression he'd never once given Bianca. And Chloe, the 4-year-old hugging her torn stuffed bear, would become the tiny hero who saw what every wealthy adult chose to ignore. What happened in those 10 agonizing minutes between life and death? Why did a 4-year-old girl recognize the illness before the child's father did? And what horrifying secret was waiting when Adriano discovered that Bianca's family were the very people who'd refused to save his son years ago? If you want to know how the coldest mafia boss in New York ended up on his knees begging, hit like on this video right now. Share it with the people you love so they'll understand this. Never judge anyone by their appearance. And subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories that reach straight into the heart like this. 2 hours earlier, Los Angeles International Airport was still submerged in the darkness of early morning. The clock read 5:47 a.m. when Amelia Parker led her little daughter by the hand into the check-in hall, her eyes still stinging from lack of sleep, yet glimmering with something rare she hadn't carried for 4 long years: hope. Chloe, 4 years old, took tiny steps beside her mother, one hand gripping Amelia's tightly, the other clinging to a worn old stuffed bear she called Honey Bear. A long line stretched in front of the business class counter, mostly businessmen in crisp, straight suits, and ladies with designer handbags and the faint drift of expensive perfume. In the middle of that crowd, Amelia looked like an ink stain on spotless white cloth. Her navy blue dress had been washed until the color faded at the shoulders, and a few threads had come loose at the hem that she hadn't had time to sew back. Her chestnut brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, with a few early silver strands catching the fluorescent light. Traces of sleepless nights and days worked to the edge of exhaustion. But what held people's gaze the longest was her hands marked by years of unceasing labor. calloused, rough, nails cut short and cracked from too much dishwater, from scrubbing floors, from washing clothes, from every kind of work people tried to hide, as if it were something shameful. When it was her turn, Amelia placed 2 tickets on the counter, her heart beating a little faster even as she forced herself to look calm. The check-in agent, Amanda, with perfect pink gel nails, picked up the ticket, read the words first class, then lifted her head and looked Amelia up and down. That look lingered on the old dress, on the worn, soled shoes, on the frayed cloth bag over her shoulder, faded from use, and finally on her rough, reddened skin resting on the counter. Amanda frowned and glanced at the colleague beside her, with a suspicion she didn't bother to hide. "I'm sorry. Could you wait just a moment? I need to confirm this ticket," she said, her voice gentle, yet filled with unmistakable doubt. Amelia nodded. She'd gotten used to this, used to the probing stares, the whispers behind her back, the assumptions people made about her based on nothing but appearances. Amanda tapped the intercom phone, and a few minutes later a middle-aged man in a gray suit walked over, the morning shift manager. He took the ticket, checked it, looked at Amelia, then checked it again, repeating the cycle 3 times as if he couldn't trust his own eyes. "This ticket was booked by Johns Hopkins Hospital," Amelia said, her voice strangely steady, as if she'd practiced the sentence all night. "I was invited to present at their medical conference in New York." The manager looked at her once more, then nodded reluctantly, signaling Amanda to print the boarding passes. The whole process took nearly 15 minutes for something that should have taken 2. When they finally stepped away from the counter, Chloe tipped her face up to her mother, her clear blue eyes wide. "Mom, why are they looking at us so weird?" Amelia bent down and gave her little girl a gentle smile. "Because they haven't seen us fly first class before, sweetheart. But it's okay. Today is a special day." She took Chloe's hand and walked toward the gate, an old cloth backpack on her shoulder holding everything that mattered most in her life. Inside was a silver stethoscope, slightly dulled by time, the back engraved with the words, "Heal with love, Dad," in the trembling handwriting of her elderly father in the last days of his life. Beside it were 3 handwritten research notebooks on school paper, each tiny line of writing carefully recorded in the late hours after she'd finished washing stacks of dishes piled like mountains. The invitation letter from Johns Hopkins was folded neatly inside a clear plastic sleeve. Amelia, afraid sweat from her hands might smear the ink, afraid rain might soak it, afraid of anything that could destroy the only paper passport that could carry her to the dream her father hadn't lived long enough to see. There was also a small photograph, its corner slightly curled with time, of a man with salt and pepper hair in a white lab coat, a gentle smile and warm, bright eyes. Dr. William Parker, the father who'd taught her everything about medicine, about compassion, about the true meaning of the word healing. And finally, in the smallest pocket of the backpack, there were $200 in cash, folded neatly, all the savings she had, scraped together from 4 jobs over 8 months, in case something went wrong in New York. Amelia looked out through the airport glass, the Los Angeles sky slowly shifting from black to pale gray. She didn't know that in a few hours, the very hands people had just despised would become the only hands that could save a child's life, and the most powerful Mafia boss in New York would have to kneel before her. Amelia sat down in the waiting seats near the boarding gate, Chloe already dozing off on her mother's lap, the child's steady breathing like a soft lullaby. She took her father's photograph from the backpack, her calloused fingers drifting gently over the face of the man in a white lab coat, and the memories came rushing back like a tide that couldn't be held. 12 years earlier, Amelia was 15, standing at the front door watching her mother pull a suitcase toward a taxi. "Where are you going, Mom?" she asked, still too innocent to understand what was happening. The blonde woman turned back to look at her daughter, her eyes cold, not a single tear in them. "I can't live like this anymore, Amelia. Your father loves his patients more than his family, loves that damn hospital more than he loves me. I deserve to be happy." And then she left, without a goodbye, without a hug, without looking back, even as Amelia kept calling after her until her voice went hoarse. That night, Dr. William Parker came home late as he always did, and found his daughter curled up in the darkness of the living room. He didn't say a word. He simply sat down beside her and wrapped his arms around her thin, trembling shoulders. "I'm sorry, Mia," he whispered, using the nickname only the 2 of them shared. "I couldn't keep your mother here." Amelia cried in her father's arms until there were no tears left. But from that night on, instead of collapsing, she found a new purpose. Dr. William Parker began teaching his daughter medicine every night after work. He taught her how to read cardiac charts, how to recognize the symptoms of hundreds of illnesses, how to listen to a patient's breathing, and understand what their body was trying to say. "You've got the eyes of a real doctor, Mia," he'd often say, pride shining in his gaze. "You see what other people miss." 3 years later, Amelia graduated high school with the highest scores in her class and received a full scholarship to UCLA's Accelerated Pre-Medical Program, one of the most prestigious medical schools in the United States. The day she received her acceptance letter, Dr. Parker cried, those rare tears from a man who'd been strong his entire life. "You'll be a doctor 100 times better than I ever was, Mia. I believe that." But fate was a cruel mother who loved playing ruthless games with her children. In her second year of college, Amelia met Tyler Morrison in the medical library. He was handsome, charming, the only son of the chairman of Morrison Holdings, one of the largest construction corporations in Los Angeles. Tyler pursued her relentlessly. Roses every day, romantic dinners, sweet words like honey poured into the ears of a young woman who'd never been loved by her own mother. "You deserve to be pampered, Amelia. Stop burying your head in those books. Let me take care of you." Dr. Parker warned his daughter when he found out. "I don't trust that man, Mia. Real love doesn't need to show itself off with money." But Amelia didn't listen. She was too hungry to be loved after years without her mother's touch. They married after 6 months of knowing each other. A lavish wedding the bride barely had time to understand. Hell began right after the honeymoon. Tyler changed completely, as if he'd worn a mask the whole time, and only now let his true face show. "You don't need to go to school anymore," he declared one evening, as Amelia was preparing for the next day's work. "I've got enough money to support you for the rest of your life. But I want to be a doctor, Tyler. It's my dream, and my father's." "Your father?" Tyler laughed, cold and sharp. "A broke, poor doctor working at a public hospital? You want to become like him? Drop out. If you keep going to school, I'll consider it betrayal." Then Tyler began controlling everything. Her phone, her schedule, her friends, even the clothes she wore. He forbade Amelia from contacting her father, saying Dr. Parker was a bad influence who made her unable to obey her husband. When Amelia tried to resist, Tyler hit her for the first time. A thunderclap slap that sent her down to the floor, her ears ringing from the shock. "It's your fault," he said icily as Amelia lay there crying at his feet. "You made me do it." The violence became routine. Amelia dropped out of school because Tyler threatened to kill himself if she left him. She cut off contact with her father because she was afraid Tyler would take revenge. She became a shadow of herself, a puppet that could walk and breathe, but had already died on the inside. When Amelia became pregnant with Chloe, she thought everything would change. But Tyler hit her even when her belly was large, careful only to avoid her stomach because he still wanted an heir. During that time, Dr. William Parker discovered he had stage 4 lung cancer. He hid it from his daughter, not wanting her to worry, not wanting to add to a life he knew was already heavy with pain. He kept working, kept researching, trying to finish what was left unfinished before time ran out. Chloe was born on a stormy, rain-soaked night. Tyler looked at the red, newborn baby in the nurse's arms, then turned away without a word. "A girl," he said to Amelia, exhausted on the hospital bed. Useless, just like her mother. 3 days after Amelia came home, Tyler got drunk and beat her while she was breastfeeding. "I wanted a son. Why'd you give me this useless thing?" Amelia shielded Chloe with her own body, taking every punch and kick, as long as her daughter wasn't hurt. At the same time, Dr. Parker lay dying in a hospital room with no daughter beside him. He'd called Amelia, but Tyler wouldn't let her answer. What does that old man want? Trying to split us up? When Amelia secretly called back, her father had already slipped into a coma. 2 days later, Dr. William Parker died in the hospital, alone, without his daughter, without family, with only the night shift nurse holding his hand in his final moments. That nurse called Amelia when Tyler was away. "Miss Parker, your father has passed. Before he went, he asked me to tell you one thing." Amelia stood in the kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried not to make a sound. "What did he say?" He said, "Live, Mia. Never stop healing." Her father's last words became a small, smoldering flame in Amelia's chest, keeping her from collapsing completely through the dark months that followed. But it took another year. A year filled with tears and blood, before she found the courage to escape the hell named Tyler Morrison. That fateful night, Chloe had just turned 1. The baby cried for her mother in the middle of the night with a mild fever, the sound echoing through the silent mansion. Tyler was drunk after a night of partying with friends, and he stormed into Chloe's room, his eyes bloodshot with senseless rage. "Make her shut up!" he roared at Amelia, who was trying to soothe the child. "I can't sleep because of this useless thing." Amelia held Chloe tight against her, trying to shield her the way she always had. "She has a fever, Tyler. She needs care, not yelling." That sentence was like throwing oil on fire. Tyler lunged forward, snatching Chloe away with a display of heartless aggression that no father should ever inflict, leaving a permanent scar on the child's sense of safety and Amelia's soul. Chloe's crying turned into a scream of terror, her cheek flushing red with the clear imprint of 5 fingers from the man who called himself her father. Something inside Amelia shattered in that instant, but at the same time, something else woke up. She ran to the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife from the block, and came back into Chloe's room with the wild eyes of a mother animal protecting her young. "Touch my child again," she said, her voice as cold as ice and as steady as steel, "and I'll kill you." Tyler stared at the gleaming blade in his wife's hand, and for the first time, he felt fear. He backed away, called the police, and falsely accused Amelia of being a crazed mother threatening the lives of the entire family. The divorce case that dragged on for 6 months became the darkest days of Amelia's life. Tyler hired the most expensive team of lawyers in Los Angeles, and they painted her as a mentally unstable woman, unfit to raise a child. Amelia had no money, no attorney, no one on her side. She thought she was going to lose Chloe, lose the only thing left that still had meaning. And then Linda Chen appeared, a human rights lawyer who worked pro bono for women suffering domestic violence. She unearthed Amelia's medical records over the years, documenting hospital admissions for falling down the stairs or bumping into a door, the bruises, the broken bones, and even fingerprints on her throat. The evidence of abuse was brought into court and completely overturned Tyler's lies. Amelia won, gained custody, but she walked out of the marriage with exactly what she'd brought in, not a single penny. Tyler gave a thin, contemptuous laugh as he signed the divorce papers. "You'll die in poverty, and I'll laugh." He didn't know Amelia had lived in poverty her whole life with her father, and she wasn't afraid of it. The only thing she feared was losing her daughter. And now Chloe was safe in her arms. The next 3 years were an endless fight for survival. Amelia rented a 25-square-meter studio apartment in East Los Angeles, where the walls were moldy, the pipes leaked, and the wail of ambulance sirens cut through the night. She worked 4 jobs at once to keep them alive, washing dishes at Denny's from 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, cleaning offices from 3 to 6, serving at a coffee shop from 7 at night to 10, and caring for the elderly at a nursing home on the night shift from 11 at night to 4 in the morning. She slept an average of 3 hours a day, ate whatever was cheapest she could buy, wore the same few old outfits over and over until they frayed and tore. But Chloe always had enough milk, enough food, enough clean clothes, even if they came from a thrift store. Night after night, after Chloe was asleep, Amelia would pull out her father's 3 unfinished research notebooks on early diagnosis of congenital adrenal insufficiency in children, the disease medicine called CAH. Under the weak yellow light of their miserable apartment, she read, took notes, analyzed, and completed what her father hadn't lived long enough to finish. No laboratory, no equipment, no mentor, only the knowledge her father had given her, and the observant eyes he'd always been proud of. 8 months earlier, when the paper was finally complete, Amelia took a gamble and sent it to Johns Hopkins Hospital, clinging to a hope as thin as a strand of thread. She didn't dare imagine anyone would read it, much less reply. But 3 weeks later, her phone rang in the middle of a dishwashing shift. "Is this Amelia Parker, the author of the paper on the early diagnostic protocol for CAH?" The voice on the other end belonged to an older woman, authoritative, and yet unable to hide her astonishment. "Yes, that's me," Amelia answered, her hands still wet with dishwater. "I'm Dr. Catherine Wells, Director of Pediatric Research at Johns Hopkins. I need to meet you, in person." 3 days later, Dr. Wells flew from Baltimore to Los Angeles herself. She found Amelia standing at a sink piled high like a mountain at Denny's, her hands reddened from hot water, her hair hurriedly pinned up, damp with sweat. "Doctor," Wells stood there, staring for a long moment, comparing the woman in front of her with the name of the author of the finest research she'd read in 10 years. "You wrote this by yourself?" she asked, setting the printed paper down on the counter. "No laboratory? No equipment? No supervisor?" Amelia wiped her hands on her worn old apron and met the powerful woman's eyes. "My father taught me to observe. He said the eyes are the most important instrument a doctor has. I only finished what he started." "Doctor." Wells fell silent, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled slightly with emotion. "You're a genius, Amelia Parker, and the world needs to know it. Johns Hopkins wants to invite you to present this research at the International Medical Conference. We'll cover all expenses, including first-class plane tickets for you and your daughter." The first-class tickets were in her hands, yet Amelia still couldn't believe what she was seeing, not even now as she sat in the airport lounge watching her daughter sleep soundly. Chloe, a 4-year-old with blonde curls like an angel, was the only reason Amelia was still standing after every storm life had thrown at her. But there was something few people knew. Chloe herself had once nearly died in her mother's arms, and that brush with death had made her an unusual child. 2 years earlier, when Chloe had just turned 2, on a bitter winter night, the little girl suddenly spiked a high fever of 40 degrees. Her forehead burned like hot coals. Her tiny body trembled with mild seizures. Her eyes dulled, drifting away from life. Amelia knew her child needed a hospital immediately, but in her pocket that night she had only $17 left. Not enough for a taxi, let alone medical bills. She called an ambulance, but when they heard the address in crime-ridden East Los Angeles, they said she'd have to wait at least 2 hours because there weren't enough units. 2 hours meant Chloe would die. In that most desperate moment, Amelia remembered her father's lessons. "When you have nothing in your hands, you still have knowledge, Mia. No one can steal that." She carried Chloe to the bathtub and ran warm water to bring the temperature down slowly, not cold water that could cause shock. She mixed an oral rehydration solution with salt, sugar, and warm water in the exact ratio her father had taught her, patiently spooning tiny amounts into Chloe's mouth because she was too weak to swallow. For 3 nights in a row, Amelia didn't sleep for a single minute. Her eyes locked on every breath her daughter took, her hands constantly checking pulse and temperature like a machine. She watched skin color, moisture on the lips, pupil reaction, every vital sign her father had trained her to observe since she was 15. On the 3rd night, when the fever finally broke, Chloe opened her eyes, looked at her mother, and whispered, "Mom, I'm thirsty," in a frail little voice, and Amelia cried like she'd never been allowed to cry before. Her daughter survived, not because of a hospital, not because of a doctor, but because of the knowledge of a father who was gone, and the calloused hands of a mother who refused to surrender to fate. After that night, Amelia began teaching Chloe how to listen to her own body. "Sweetheart, if you ever feel hot, tired, dizzy, you have to tell Mommy right away," she told her every day like a prayer. "And if you see someone else who looks sick, pale lips, dull eyes, breathing fast, you have to tell Mommy too. Okay?" Chloe nodded, her clear blue eyes fixed on her mother with a seriousness that didn't belong to a 2-year-old. And strangely, the little girl began to notice things adults usually missed. Maybe because she'd once stood on the line between life and death, Chloe became unusually sensitive to the signs of illness. At preschool, she once tugged her teacher's hand and said, "Teacher, Tommy's breathing weird," exactly 15 minutes before Tommy had an asthma attack. Another time, Chloe insisted on going home early because teacher's really tired, her face is red, and the next day, they learned the teacher had been hospitalized with dengue fever. Moments like that happened so often, the teachers began calling Chloe the little doctor, and Amelia knew her daughter had inherited her grandfather's observant eyes. The eyes doctor. William Parker had once praised for seeing what other people overlook. The boarding announcement pulled Amelia out of her memories. She gently woke Chloe, and the little girl rubbed her sleepy eyes, then grabbed her mother's hand tight, her other arm clinging to Honey Bear. When they stepped into the first-class cabin, Chloe's mouth fell open in amazement. "Mom, the seats are so big, bigger than my bed." The child ran to the wide leather seat and traced the stitching with her fingers as if she were touching something that couldn't be real. "Is this our seat, Mom?" "Really, Mom?" Amelia smiled and bent to kiss her daughter's forehead. "It is, sweetheart. Today is a special day for us." She settled Chloe into the window seat, buckled her in, then sat down beside her. For the first time in her life, Amelia felt like she deserved to sit in a place like this. But she didn't know that in just a few minutes, this peaceful first-class cabin would turn into a battlefield, and Chloe's seeing eyes would once again catch what all the wealthy adults around them failed to notice. While Amelia and Chloe were settled into their first-class seats, savoring a rare pocket of peace, elsewhere in Los Angeles Airport, a group was moving with a force that made everyone automatically step aside. At the front was a tall man in a perfectly tailored black Armani suit, every step radiating absolute authority, the kind that didn't need to be flaunted with words, because a single look was enough to make people lower their eyes. Adriano Russo, 36 years old, the third-generation boss of the Russo family, the man the New York underworld called with fearful reverence Il Diavolo, the devil. In his arms was a 3-year-old boy dozing off, black curls just like his father's, but with a face that was unusually pale. Behind Adriano was Bruno Castellano, the head bodyguard and assassin, a 42-year-old man built like a bear, 1.90 meters tall and 120 kilos of solid muscle. Beside Bruno was Enzo Marini, 33, a man of few words, but with eyes so sharp they missed nothing around him. Adriano's ears and eyes, the one who knew everything about everyone. The Russo family wasn't an ordinary family. They controlled 60% of New York's underground operations. Casinos, loan sharking, protection rackets, luxury smuggling. Their fortune was estimated at nearly $3 billion, legal and illegal combined, enough to buy a small country outright. But the Russo power wasn't built on money. It was built on blood, on fear, and on whispered stories about people who dared challenge them and then vanished without a trace. Adriano hadn't been born to become a monster. 17 years earlier, when he was only 19, he had been an ordinary college student, the son of Don Ricardo Russo, but never involved in the family's business. Then one fateful night, his father was ambushed and shot dead on his way home, 12 bullets tearing through his body, sent by a rival family eager to seize Russo territory. Adriano flew back to New York that same night, his eyes still red from crying for his father. But when he stepped into the family's meeting room, he saw his uncle, Vittorio Russo, already seated in the Don's chair, issuing orders to the underbosses as if he were the rightful successor. Adriano is young, Vittorio told everyone, not even bothering to look at the nephew standing in the doorway. He's weak. All he knows is reading books. The family needs a strong leader right now. 3 days later, Vittorio Russo's body was found in his private office, a single bullet through his head. No one knew what had happened, but everyone saw Adriano sitting in the Don's chair, gray eyes cold as steel, the gun still warm on the table. "Anyone else want to say I'm weak?" he asked, his voice low and even in a way that was terrifying. No one answered. No one dared. From that moment on, Adriano Russo became Il Diavolo. 2 years later, when he was 21, the mastermind behind his father's assassination was captured and brought before Adriano. Instead of using a gun, he killed the man with his bare hands, blow after blow, slowly and ruthlessly, to send a message to the entire underworld. Never touch anyone belonging to the Russo family. Rumors of that night spread everywhere. People said Adriano never changed his expression the entire time, his eyes cold as if he were doing an ordinary job. After that, no one dared challenge the Russo family again. But even the devil had a weakness. 10 years after becoming Don, Adriano met Serena, a piano teacher whose smile was warm as morning sunlight. She was the only person unafraid of him, the only one who looked at him like an ordinary man instead of a monster. They married after a year, and for the first time in his life, Adriano felt he could be happy. Then Serena became pregnant with Leo, and tragedy struck. The delivery was harder than expected. Serena lost too much blood. The best doctors money could buy were helpless. Adriano stood outside the delivery room, for the first time in 10 years, feeling completely powerless. All his authority, all his money, all the fear he spread, couldn't save the woman he loved. Serena died right after giving birth to Leo, only managing to look at her son one single time. The last thing she said to Adriano was, "Love him for both of us." For the past 3 years, Adriano hadn't been able to do it. Every time he looked at Leo, he saw Serena, and the pain of loss ripped his chest apart all over again. He kept his distance from his son, hired the nanny, Rosa, to care for him instead of becoming a father with his own hands. He paid for everything Leo needed, but he was never there when Leo needed him. He didn't know what Leo liked to eat, what he feared, what he dreamed about. And now, with Rosa quitting suddenly 4 days earlier because her mother was seriously ill, Adriano couldn't clearly remember his son's medication schedule. Leo had congenital adrenal insufficiency and needed medication every day to live, but Adriano didn't even know what the medicine was called. All he knew was that there was a silver medical bracelet on Leo's wrist, engraved with 3 letters, CAH. And Rosa had explained what it meant, but he hadn't listened, because listening meant caring, and caring meant loving, and loving meant he could lose again. Adriano had already lost Serena. He didn't dare risk loving anyone anymore, not even his own son. The first-class cabin door opened, and the air changed instantly, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped by 10 degrees. Amelia was showing Chloe how to adjust the recline when she felt tension spread through the cabin. Rachel, the kind Puerto Rican flight attendant who'd just brought Chloe orange juice, suddenly went rigid, the professional smile on her lips snuffing out like a candle in the wind. Her hands shook so badly the tray nearly slipped. Bruno entered first, cold eyes sweeping across the entire first-class cabin like a predator assessing its territory. Then he gave a slight nod back toward the doorway to signal it was safe. Adriano Russo stepped in after him, Leo still asleep in his father's arms, the boy's head resting on the shoulder of an expensive Armani suit. Adriano's gray eyes didn't settle on anyone in particular, yet everyone felt watched. Enzo came in last, pulling a Hermes leather suitcase, silently studying every face in the cabin. Harrison Cole, a 55-year-old businessman in seat 1C, was sipping champagne when he suddenly choked, his face turning from rosy to chalk white in an instant. He recognized the man who'd just walked in, not because he'd met him, but because Adriano Russo's photograph sat on the whispered list of people New York business circles said you must never offend. Il Diavolo, the devil, the boss of the most notorious Mafia family on the American East Coast. Harrison remembered a story passed around at a party 2 years earlier, a businessman who'd accidentally insulted Adriano at a charity auction, just one misplaced joke about the man's watch. 2 weeks later, that businessman was found floating in the Hudson River, or at least what was left of him. The police called it suicide, but all of New York knew the truth. Harrison hurriedly lowered his head, pretending to read the in-flight magazine, praying he wouldn't do anything to draw the devil's attention. Adriano moved to row 2, where Bruno had already arranged seats for his boss and the boy. He set Leo down in seat 2A, carefully fastening the seatbelt for his son even though his movements were a bit clumsy. Then he sat in the seat beside him. Just then, a shrill female voice rang out from near the cabin door. "Adriano! I didn't expect to see you here." Bianca Harrington strode into first class as if she owned the entire plane. 32. The only daughter of real estate billionaire Marcus Harrington, Bianca was the embodiment of cold luxury. Her platinum blonde hair was styled to perfection, not a strand out of place, and an emerald green Chanel haute couture dress hugged her model figure, a limited edition Hermes Birkin worth nearly $100,000 swinging from her arm. She was beautiful in the way diamonds are, dazzling, yet cold, hard, and cruel. Adriano looked at Bianca with an expressionless gaze. "A coincidence, Bianca," he said, his voice flat as a frozen lake. "I don't remember telling anyone about this flight," Bianca laughed, a sound that tried to be sweet but couldn't hide the calculation underneath. "You know me, I have my ways." The truth was, Bianca had bribed an employee in Adriano's casino to track his schedule. She'd been doing it for 3 years, ever since Serena died, waiting for the chance to reclaim the man she believed belonged to her. 6 years earlier, Bianca and Adriano had dated for nearly a year. She was the daughter of tycoons. He was a mafia boss, a relationship built more on political calculation than real feeling. Bianca thought she'd become the boss's wife. She'd stand beside the most powerful man in New York like a queen beside her king. Then Serena appeared, an ordinary piano teacher with no pedigree, no money, no dazzling beauty, yet somehow she captured Adriano's entire heart. Bianca was discarded without a single explanation. No breakup call, only a cold notice through a lawyer that the relationship was over. She'd sworn she'd never forgive it. And when Serena died, Bianca took it as heaven's gift, her chance to seize back what she believed was hers. Bianca sat down in seat 1A, directly in front of Adriano, the spot she'd specifically requested when she bought her ticket. She turned around, pretending to chat, but really to display her beauty in Adriano's face. Right then, Bianca's eyes swept the cabin and stopped at row 4. Amelia was bent down, tying Chloe's shoelace, her brown hair hurriedly tied, hiding her face, exposing calloused hands and an old, faded dress. Bianca's green eyes narrowed like a cat spotting a mouse in its territory. She looked closer. The frayed cloth bag, the child's torn stuffed bear, the worn soles of the shoes, everything screamed the word poverty, the thing Bianca despised down to her bones. Why was someone like that sitting in first class? Bianca turned to Adriano, her lips curving into a contemptuous smile. Adriano, look. She jerked her chin toward Amelia and Chloe. Do they let just anyone into first class now? I thought you owned shares in this airline. Adriano glanced where Bianca pointed, gray eyes sweeping over Amelia, and then returning as if there were nothing worth noticing. But Bruno caught the signal, and he walked toward Amelia with footsteps heavy as thunder. Chloe lifted her head to look at the giant man standing over her, her clear blue eyes not afraid at all. She didn't know the real storm was about to begin. Bruno stood towering in front of Amelia like a wall of flesh no one could pierce, his cold eyes looking down at the brown-haired woman with undisguised contempt. Ticket. He said only that single word, his voice as deep as stones striking together, his hand, big as a fan, held out to wait. Amelia calmly opened her bag and took out the plane ticket, handing it to the giant man, her calloused hands not trembling even though her heart was beating faster than usual. Bruno checked it, read the words first class, then looked at Amelia again as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He turned back toward Adriano and nodded. Valid, boss. Bianca didn't miss the chance. She rose from her seat and strode toward Amelia, her Christian Louboutin heels clicking on the cabin floor like the claws of a hunting beast. She stopped right in front of Amelia, green eyes sweeping her victim from head to toe with open disgust. Valid? Really? Bianca scoffed, her shrill voice slicing through the quiet cabin. I can't even understand it. Just look at this dress. It's been washed until the shoulders are practically white. Did you buy it at a thrift store for $5? She bent to peer at Honey Bear in Chloe's arms, wrinkling her nose as if she smelled something rotten. And this thing too, a torn, stinking stuffed bear. Adriano, I'm allergic to poverty. Letting people like this share a cabin with your son is an insult to the entire Russo family. Harrison Cole saw Bianca attacking and decided it was a good opportunity to win the devil's favor. He lowered the magazine and joined in with the lofty tone of a businessman used to looking down on the poor. Miss Harrington is right. First class has standards. Just look at her hands. They're clearly hands that belong in the servants' quarters. Maybe she won some charity lottery. Those programs that let poor people fly, you know? Bianca let out a shrill laugh, emboldened. A lottery? Or maybe she provides special services to someone for that ticket. People like her usually do. Amelia lifted her head, her brown eyes looking straight at Bianca without flinching. My ticket was purchased by Johns Hopkins Hospital. I was invited to present at the medical conference. Johns Hopkins? Bianca nearly choked laughing. A prestigious hospital invited you? Don't lie. Look at those calloused hands. You're obviously a dishwasher. What were you invited to Johns Hopkins for? The menial labor of mopping floors? Cleaning toilets? Harrison Cole laughed along, the laughter of a petty sycophant. She probably confused Johns Hopkins with John's Diner, the place where she washes dishes. The two of them laughed loudly, their cruel laughter echoing through the first-class cabin like a knife cutting into flesh. Adriano stayed seated, unmoving, gray eyes coldly watching the spectacle without intervening. When Bianca turned to him as if waiting for his approval, he finally spoke, his voice low, and even in a way that was terrifying. She can sit, if the ticket is valid. But Bruno, he looked at his head bodyguard, make sure she doesn't look, doesn't speak, doesn't touch my son. If any of her things touches Leo, handle it. And Bruno? He paused, letting the next words hang heavy with threat. You're very creative in how you handle things. Amelia felt coldness crawl up her spine. She didn't know what creative meant, but the way Bruno smiled at those words told her this wasn't an empty threat. Chloe shrank into her mother's arms, her big blue eyes brimming with tears, her lips trembling. Mom, she whispered, her voice thick with panic. Why does that man hate us? Did we do something wrong, Mom? Amelia's heart felt squeezed tight at her daughter's question. She pulled Chloe close and kissed the child's blonde curls. No, sweetheart, we didn't do anything wrong. Some people just like making others sad. Bianca tossed her hair and returned to her seat with the air of victory, as if she'd just taught someone beneath her a lesson they'd never forget. The plane began to taxi down the runway. Chloe was still trembling in her mother's arms, but the child's sensitive eyes didn't only see the adult's cruelty. She peered through the gap between the rows and saw the 3-year-old boy lying in seat 2A. Leo was awake now, but he wasn't fussing the way most children would in an unfamiliar place. He simply lay there, brown eyes dull, staring up at the cabin ceiling without blinking, his skin unusually pale under the warm yellow lights. Chloe tilted her head and watched, the instincts her mother had trained into her over the past 2 years beginning to stir. She tugged lightly at Amelia's sleeve, her whisper tiny, as if she were afraid someone might hear. "Mom, that baby looks sad, like me when I was really, really sick." The plane had been in the air for 45 minutes, gliding smoothly at 36,000 feet above clouds as white and fluffy as cotton. First class had settled back into silence after the initial humiliation. Bianca was slowly sipping a glass of Dom Perignon while scrolling on her phone. Harrison Cole had drifted off with the in-flight magazine covering his face, and Adriano sat unmoving like a stone statue, gray eyes fixed on the empty space ahead as if no one could tell what he was thinking. Leo lay in the seat beside his father, still unnaturally quiet, not crying, not asking for anything, not craning around with the restless curiosity most 3-year-olds couldn't hide. Amelia tried to focus on her presentation on her old phone, but Chloe's whisper kept echoing in her ears. "That baby looks sad." She glanced toward row 2, and what she saw made the instincts of someone trained in medicine start ringing alarm bells. Leo's skin was paler than it had been when they boarded. His lips were dry and lightly cracked, his breathing shallow and fast in a way that wasn't normal. But Amelia didn't dare stare for long. Adriano's threat was still rattling around in her head. Bruno's very creative in how he handles things. Then, without warning, Leo gave a few rough coughs and vomited, everything in his stomach surging up and splattering straight onto Adriano's $15,000 Armani suit. The Mafia boss jolted to his feet and stared down at the suit smeared with vomit, his face twisted with disgust. "Damn it!" Adriano roared, not from fear for his child, but because the expensive suit had been ruined. "Bruno, a towel, now!" Bruno hurried to hand his boss a towel while Enzo rushed off to find a flight attendant. Adriano scrubbed at the fabric, frowning down at Leo. The little boy slumped on the seat, his skin turning a sickly pale green, sweat beading on his forehead, his eyes dull, the life in them thinning away. Yet instead of worry, Adriano only looked irritated. "What does Rosa usually give him when he's like this?" he snapped at Bruno. Bruno shook his head, confused. "I don't know, boss. Rosa handled those things." "Enzo?" Enzo shook his head too. "Rosa's been gone 4 days, boss. There was no handoff." Adriano clenched his jaw, and for the first time he felt it, the ugly truth that he knew nothing about his own son. He didn't know what Leo ate, what he drank, what he liked, what he feared, and most of all, he didn't know the medication schedule Rosa had managed for 3 years. Rachel brought wet towels. The flight attendant tried to clean the vomit from the seat and from Leo's clothes, her hands trembling with fear. Leo didn't resist. He lay there like a cloth doll, too drained to cry, too drained to fuss. In row 4, Chloe watched everything with worried blue eyes, tugging at her mother's sleeve again and again, whispering, small but urgent, "Mom, Mom, the baby's sick. Sick like me when I was really, really sick, Mom. The baby's skin is so white, the baby can't even cry, just like me back then." Amelia looked toward Leo, and this time she couldn't ignore it. Eyes trained by her father recognized the danger at once. The gray pallor that wasn't motion sickness, the cracked dry lips signaling severe dehydration, the shallow, rapid breathing showing the body was starving for oxygen, the cold sweat on the forehead, a symptom of shock. And then she saw it. The silver medical bracelet on Leo's right wrist, engraved with 3 letters she'd studied for 4 years, CAH. Amelia's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a fist. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, the exact disease she and her father had researched, the disease she was about to present at Johns Hopkins. She knew, with the certainty of someone who'd lived inside the details, that if a child with CAH didn't get medication on time, the body would crash into crisis, and without emergency treatment, the boy would die. Amelia wanted to stand, wanted to rush to Leo, wanted to shout that the child was in critical condition. But the moment she started to rise, Bianca whirled around, green eyes sharp as blades. "What are you looking at?" Bianca hissed, her face hostile. "Don't look at Adriano's child with those hungry eyes. Who do you think you are? A dishwasher trying to climb into a mafia boss's bed? Amelia froze, the insults hitting like icy water thrown in her face. She looked to Adriano, hoping he'd see that his son was in danger. But the mafia boss was still busy wiping at his expensive suit, scowling at the inconvenience. None of them saw what she saw. None of them cared. Amelia lowered her gaze, silent, powerless. She knew that if she spoke up, they wouldn't believe her. They'd laugh. And Bruno, with his so-called creativity, would make sure she and Chloe would never reach New York. Chloe gripped her mother's hand, blue eyes flooded. "Mom, why aren't you helping the baby?" Amelia pulled her close, her voice breaking. "They don't want Mommy to help, sweetheart. They don't believe Mommy." Chloe sat in her mother's lap, big blue eyes locked on the boy in row 2. Her heart thumped hard inside her tiny chest, a familiar feeling rising up, the same feeling she'd had when she saw Tommy about to have an asthma attack, when she saw her teacher on the verge of getting sick. She knew that baby was ill, very ill, and no one was doing anything. The adults were only busy wiping a suit jacket, only busy mocking her mother. No one saw what she saw. Mom said they didn't believe her, but Chloe couldn't understand why. Mom was so good. Mom had saved her when she'd been terribly sick. Mom knew how to fix sickness. Why wouldn't they let Mom help? Chloe looked at Leo again, his skin now so pale it was almost translucent, his lips shifting from washed out to a dull gray, his chest fluttering like a dying baby bird. No, she couldn't sit still anymore. Mom had taught her that when you see someone who looks sick, you have to speak up, and right now that baby was very sick, and no one would listen. With her tiny hands, Chloe unlatched her seatbelt, the metallic click snapping through the quiet cabin. Amelia startled and turned, just in time to see her daughter slide down from the seat. "Chloe, what are you doing?" she whispered in panic, reaching to pull her back. But Chloe slipped out of her mother's grasp, little feet moving quickly down the aisle between the rows. She stopped right in front of Adriano Russo, the mafia boss who terrified all of New York, the man even the hardest criminals didn't dare look in the eye. But Chloe was only 4, and she didn't know what fear was when a life needed saving. "Sir," Chloe spoke in a clear, childlike voice, blue eyes staring straight into Adriano's cold gray eyes. "Your baby is sick. Really, really sick." Adriano blinked, because this was the first time anyone had dared speak to him directly without permission, and that person was a 4-year-old girl clutching a torn stuffed bear. Before he could react, Bianca lunged in like a snake whose territory had been invaded. "Who gave this brat permission to come here?" she snarled, her hand shooting out to grab Chloe's arm. "Are you deaf?" Adriano already said it. "Don't come near Leo." But Chloe didn't back away. She dodged Bianca's hand and took one more step toward Adriano, her small voice suddenly louder, clearer, like an alarm bell in the middle of the night. "He's breathing really fast. His skin is so white. He can't even cry anymore, just like me when I was really, really sick." Chloe drew a deep breath, then screamed with all the strength in her little body. "My mom knows how to save him. My mom is really good." The entire first-class cabin went dead silent. Harrison Cole jolted awake, blinking in confusion at the blonde little girl standing face to face with the devil. Rachel stood frozen at the back of the cabin, one hand clamped over her mouth in horror. Bruno and Enzo traded glances, not knowing how to handle this, because no one had ever trained them for what to do with a 4-year-old child. Bianca burst out laughing, a shrill, contemptuous sound that filled the cabin. "A doctor? Her mom is a doctor?" She jabbed a finger toward Amelia, who was standing trembling in the aisle, tears in her eyes from fear for her child. "Adriano, look at her. Look at those calloused hands. Are those a doctor's hands or a common scullery maid? That kid is crazy like her mother, making things up." Adriano looked at Chloe, then at Amelia, gray eyes still cold, still emotionless. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to order Bruno to drag the girl away, maybe to threaten Amelia again, but he never got the chance to finish, because at that exact moment, Leo convulsed. The small body of the 3-year-old suddenly arched like a bow, muscles locking and jerking violently out of control, arms and legs thrashing against the seat with terrifying thuds. Leo's brown eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, and his lips shifted from gray to blue-purple with horrifying speed. Foam spilled from the corners of his mouth, his breathing breaking apart as if an invisible hand were squeezing his throat shut. "Leo!" Adriano roared, and for the first time his voice lost its coldness, replaced by pure terror. He lunged to his son's side, but he didn't know what to do. Hands that had killed without shaking now trembling as he tried to hold his child's convulsing body. Bianca stumbled backward, her face turning corpse white, her mouth hanging open, no sound coming out. No one could deny it anymore. No one could laugh anymore. The 4-year-old girl clutching a torn stuffed bear had been right from the beginning. Adriano Russo, Il Diavolo, the devil, the Mafia boss who made all of New York tremble, the man who'd shot his own uncle with a single bullet at 19, the one who'd strangled an enemy to death with his bare hands without so much as changing his expression, was now shaking like a lost child in a crowded market. The hands that had once crushed the throats of enemies without trembling were trembling so badly he couldn't even keep his son's convulsing body steady. The steel-cold gray eyes were now bloodshot with panic. Every layer of the powerful Don's armor stripped away in an instant, revealing the man underneath, a weak, terrified father watching his child die and unable to do a thing. Leo, son, Adriano bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. Look at me, Leo, look at me. But Leo couldn't look at anyone. His eyes had rolled all the way back, leaving only 2 terrifying whites. The seizure showed no sign of stopping. The boy's lips now dark purple, his skin turning ash gray, his breathing broken and so faint it was almost gone. Bruno rushed to his boss, but the moment he saw Leo's condition, the notorious killer went still. In 15 years at Adriano's side, Bruno had witnessed countless deaths, caused countless deaths, but none of that blood-soaked experience meant anything in this moment. Boss, Bruno stammered, the face that was usually brutal now twisted with helplessness. I can kill 20 men, but I can't save the boy. I don't know what to do. Enzo ran to find a flight attendant, shouting for a doctor over the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, is there a doctor on board? We have an emergency. Please come to first class immediately. No one answered. There was no doctor on this flight. Or if there was, they didn't dare step into first class, knowing Il Diavolo was there. In that moment, Amelia stepped forward. She'd decided that whether they believed her or not, whether Bruno was creative or not, she couldn't stand there and watch a 3-year-old die in front of her. She was the daughter of Dr. William Parker. She'd promised her father she'd never stop healing, and today she was going to keep that promise. I can help, Amelia said, her voice strangely calm in the chaos. He's in shock from adrenal insufficiency. If he isn't treated right now, he'll die in minutes. Bianca struck like a provoked snake, lunging to block Amelia from Adriano. No, don't listen to her, Bianca screamed, her face sickly pale, yet still fighting to stop it at any cost. She's not a doctor. She's just a nameless laborer. She could kill Leo. Rachel came running back with the emergency medical kit, but Bianca stepped in her way, shouting at her to stop as if she had the authority to command the crew. You cannot let this stranger touch him, Bianca screamed at Rachel, trying to physically block the medical kit from reaching Amelia's hands. There is no doctor on this plane, Enzo shouted from the back of the cabin. We've asked. No one answered. Leo was still convulsing, but the jerking was growing weaker, not because he was recovering, but because the small body had run out of energy. That was the worst sign. Amelia knew it well. It meant Leo's heart was about to stop. Bruno looked at Leo, then at Amelia, then at Bianca clutching the medical kit. In that instant, the instinct of a man who'd followed Adriano for 15 years spoke up. His boss needed someone to save the boy, and that girl was the only one who'd stepped forward. The assassin lunged in and ripped the medical kit from Bianca's hands with unstoppable strength. Bianca screamed in shock but couldn't do a thing. Bruno had already turned his back on her, walked to Amelia, and placed the kit in her hands. Save the boy, Bruno said, his voice low and firm. If you can, Bianca shrieked. Bruno, you dare betray Adriano? You dare listen to this dishwasher? Bruno turned to Bianca, eyes cold as ice. I'm not betraying the boss. I'm trying to save the boss's heir. And you? His teeth clenched slightly. You'd better shut up if you don't want me to get creative with you. Bianca stepped back, and for the first time she was truly afraid. Amelia held the medical kit, ready to move to Leo, but a hand closed around her wrist. Adriano Russo's hand. She turned and saw the Mafia boss on his knees in front of her, literally on his knees on the cabin floor, gray eyes wet with tears as he looked up at her with naked desperation. His hands were gripping her calloused hands, the same hands he'd despised minutes earlier as a dishwasher's hands. Please, Adriano said, his voice thick and breaking, as if each word had to be scraped out of his throat. Save my son. I'll do anything. Anything. Money, power, whatever you want. I'll give it to you. Just save Leo. This was the first time in his life Adriano Russo had begged anyone, the first time he'd knelt before another person, and that person was the poor woman he'd just humiliated, the woman with calloused hands and a faded dress, the woman he'd called that thing and threatened to have Bruno handle. Amelia looked down at the man kneeling at her feet, then at Leo dying on the seat. She didn't need money, she didn't need power, she didn't need anything from the Mafia boss. She only needed to save a 3-year-old child who was dying. She gently pulled her hand free from Adriano's grip, stepped to Leo, and began doing what she'd been born to do. Amelia moved fast, as if she'd been trained for this moment her entire life. She gently but decisively laid Leo flat on his back on the seat, loosened his collar and the waistband of his pants so blood could flow more easily. The seizure had stopped, but that wasn't good news. Leo's body was limp now like a cloth doll, completely still, lips dark purple and skin ash gray. She opened the advanced medical kit, finding the emergency steroids typically reserved for severe allergic shock, the very medication Leo desperately needed. Enough, but before giving the medicine, she needed an exact diagnosis. Amelia reached into her own backpack, which Chloe had brought beside her at some point, and pulled out the silver stethoscope that had dulled a little with time. The words "heal with love" Dad gleamed under the cabin lights as she set the stethoscope on Leo's chest. The entire first-class cabin fell completely silent, every gaze fixed on the brown-haired woman with hands that bore the scars of her sacrifice bending over a dying child. Amelia closed her eyes, focused on the sound coming through her father's stethoscope, ears trained for 12 years, listening to each weak, frantic beat. Then she opened her eyes and began reading her assessment in a calm, professional voice, as if she were standing in a major hospital's emergency room instead of on an airplane in midair. Heart rate 190, severe tachycardia, shallow, rapid breathing, about 35 breaths per minute, twice normal, blood pressure crashing, pulse weak, hard to feel at the wrist, gray skin, cold sweat, pupils dilated with sluggish reaction to light. She glanced at the medical bracelet on Leo's wrist. The bracelet confirms Ca, specifically salt-wasting type, the most severe form. Diagnosis: Addisonian crisis, an acute adrenal crisis from suddenly stopping medication. Bruno stood rigid, mouth hanging open. 15 years with Adriano, he'd seen every kind of person, every kind of situation, but he'd never seen anyone speak about medicine so fluently and with such certainty. She talks like a real doctor, he whispered to Enzo, awe in his voice. No, she talks better than a doctor. Amelia turned to Adriano, brown eyes meeting the gray eyes wet with tears. Leo has Ca. He needs hydrocortisone and fludrocortisone every day to live. When did he take his last dose? Adriano stammered, the face that had terrified New York now twisted with shame and guilt. I don't remember. Rosa handled that. She knew everything. Who is Rosa? Leo's nanny. Where is she? She quit 4 days ago. Amelia closed her eyes for 1 second, fighting to keep the rage boiling in her chest under control. 4 days. 4 days without medication for a child with salt-wasting CAH was a death sentence. The fact that he was still alive was a miracle. 4 days, she repeated, her voice cold as ice. Your nanny quit 4 days ago, and you didn't check who would give your son his medicine? I thought... You thought what? That money could buy your son's health? That hiring someone else meant you didn't have to care? Do you even know what your son takes? How many milligrams? How many times a day? Adriano didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't know. He'd never cared enough to know. He only knew how to sign checks and tell himself that was being a father. You almost killed your son with your indifference, Amelia said, each word a blade driving into Adriano's chest. But this isn't the time for that. Let me save him first. She turned back to the kit and pulled out a vial of hydrocortisone and a syringe. Her hands began to shake, not because she feared Adriano or Bruno, but because she was about to do something she'd never done in her life. She'd studied hundreds of Ca cases, rehearsed the injection procedure countless times in her mind. But this was the first time she'd inject a real patient, a 3-year-old child hovering at death's edge. If she miscalculated the dose, if she injected in the wrong spot, if she did anything wrong, Leo would die, and she'd be the one who killed him. Your hands can shake, Mia, but your head has to stay still. You can do it. Her father's voice rose in her mind, warm and steady, like the days he used to sit beside her in the clinic and guide her step by step. Amelia drew a deep breath and pushed every fear out of her thoughts. She calculated the dose. Leo was about 14 kilos. The emergency hydrocortisone dose was 50 milligrams intramuscularly. The injection site, the outer thigh. She swabbed alcohol over Leo's thigh and readied the needle. Right then, a tiny hand took Leo's hand. Chloe had come to her mother's side without anyone noticing. The little girl knelt on the cabin floor, clear blue eyes gazing at the dying boy, with a tenderness that didn't belong to a 4-year-old. "Baby, don't be scared," Chloe whispered, her voice sweet as a bell. "My mom is really good. She saved me when I was really, really sick. She's going to save you. You can trust my mom." Amelia looked at her daughter, tears threatening, but she didn't let them fall. She didn't have time to cry. She slid the needle into Leo's thigh, pressed down, and injected 50 milligrams of hydrocortisone into his body. She withdrew the needle and pressed gauze to the spot. "Hydrocortisone 50 milligrams, intramuscular, outer thigh, 10:47 a.m., she said aloud, as if she were charting. "Now we wait." 5 minutes. Amelia knew hydrocortisone needed about 5 to 7 minutes to begin working in an acute adrenal crisis. 5 minutes sounded short, but when a child was dying right in front of you, 5 minutes stretched like an entire century. She stayed beside Leo, her eyes never leaving him, her hand resting on his tiny wrist to track a pulse so faint it felt like a thread that could snap at any second. The first minute passed in suffocating silence. Leo lay motionless like a wax doll, skin still gray, lips still dark purple, chest rising and falling with weak, terrifying little breaths. There was no sign of improvement. Adriano knelt beside the seat, both hands gripping his son's tiny hand. Gray eyes fixed on Leo's pallid face without blinking once. He began murmuring prayers in Italian, a language he hadn't used since the day his mother died when he was still a boy. "Dio ti prego, salvalo. Prenderò tutto il resto, ma salvalo." God, I'm begging you, save him. You can take everything else. Just save my son. The second minute, still nothing changed. Bruno stood behind his boss like a statue. The brutal face he wore every day now tightened until the muscles of his jaw bulged. Enzo stood beside him, fists clenched so hard his knuckles were white. Harrison Cole shrank into his seat, not daring to breathe too loudly. Every trace of a wealthy businessman's arrogance gone, replaced by the pure fear of a human being watching the thin line between life and death. Rachel stood at the back of the cabin, one hand over her mouth, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. In the third minute, Amelia took a small, child-sized packet of apple juice from the kit, tore the corner, and dripped a few drops onto Leo's lips. His blood sugar had almost certainly crashed after days without medication, and a little sugar would give his body enough fuel to respond to the drug. She fed him 1 drop at a time, patient, not rushing, waiting for the juice to soak through his cracked, dry lips. Adriano watched her work, not asking, not questioning, only trusting in absolute silence the woman he'd despised just minutes earlier. In the 4th minute, Amelia stared hard at Leo's mouth and her heart seemed to stop. Were his lips a little pinker now? Or was it just the cabin lights? Or was it only the desperate hope of someone praying for a miracle? She couldn't be sure. She checked the pulse again. The heart rate was still fast, but it felt a little stronger. Or maybe she was imagining it. She didn't dare say anything, afraid that speaking hope aloud would make it vanish. The entire cabin held its breath, every pair of eyes fixed on the 3-year-old boy as if staring could bring him back. Chloe was still kneeling by Leo, her tiny hand holding his, her lips moving as if she were praying in the private way of a 4-year-old. In the 5th minute, Leo's finger moved. Just a small twitch, so slight it could have been missed if Chloe hadn't been holding his hand. "Mom," Chloe whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. He moved. His hand moved. Amelia bent closer, heart pounding. She saw Leo's eyelids flutter, struggling to open after an endless nightmare. Then he opened his eyes, brown eyes dull and exhausted, but alive, staring up at the cabin ceiling as if he didn't understand what was happening. His lips moved, trying to form a sound with the last strength left in him. "Pa! Pa!" Leo whispered, a breath of a voice, but enough for Adriano to hear. enough to shatter the wall of ice the Mafia boss had built around his heart for 3 years. "My son, I'm here, I'm here," Adriano cried out, tears streaming down his angular face as he bent to gather Leo into his arms as if he feared the boy would disappear if he let go. Il Diavolo, the devil, New York's most notorious Mafia boss, was sobbing like a lost child who'd just been found. There was no coldness left, no cruelty left. Nothing but a father holding his son after nearly losing him forever. The cabin erupted. Rachel wept openly. Bruno turned his face away to hide the tears a man wasn't supposed to have. Enzo let out a breath as if a 1,000-pound boulder had just been lifted from his chest. Harrison Cole pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his eyes, murmuring Lord again and again. In the dark corner at the back of the cabin, Bianca stood alone, her face corpse pale, green eyes empty as she watched the scene without a single word. She'd lost to the poor woman with calloused hands she'd despised, and she knew Adriano would never look at her the way he was looking at Amelia. "Mom, you saved the baby," Chloe shouted, crying with joy as she hugged Honeybear tight to her chest. "You're so good. I knew it. I knew you could do it." The captain contacted air traffic control the moment the emergency was reported, and the plane was cleared for a priority landing at Denver International Airport, only 20 minutes after Leo woke up. When the wheels touched the runway, an emergency medical team was already waiting at the cabin door, with a gurney and full resuscitation equipment. Dr. Rodriguez, a senior pediatrician from Denver Children's Hospital with more than 20 years of experience, was the first to step onto the plane. He moved to Leo at once, checked vital signs, and listened while Amelia reported the patient's condition and exactly what she'd done. When she finished, Dr. Rodriguez lifted his head and looked at the brown-haired woman with eyes full of disbelief. "Perfect diagnosis," he said, his voice unable to hide his admiration. "Addisonian crisis in a child with salt-wasting type CAH. Correct treatment, correct dosage, correct timing. You saved this boy's life." He paused, eyes flicking to Leo and back to Amelia. 2 minutes later and... He didn't finish, but everyone understood what he meant. 2 minutes later and Leo would have died. His heart would have stopped, his brain would have been starved of oxygen, and nothing would have brought him back. 2 minutes. The line between life and death for Adriano Russo's son had been only 2 fragile minutes, and the girl with calloused hands had fought for every second inside that span. Leo was placed onto the gurney, and the team prepared to take him off the plane to the hospital for continued monitoring. Adriano walked beside the gurney, one hand gripping his son's hand, never leaving him for a step. At the cabin door, he stopped and turned to look at Amelia one last time. His gray eyes weren't cold anymore. They held something Amelia couldn't name. Maybe gratitude, maybe respect, maybe both. "I owe you a life," Adriano said, his voice low and firm. "My son's life. It's the biggest debt I've ever carried in my life, and I will find you to repay it. You can believe that." Then he turned to Enzo, his tone snapping back into the familiar chill of a boss giving orders. "Find out everything about Miss Parker. Full name, address, job, family, past, present, everything. I want to know everything about the woman who saved my son." "Yes, boss." Enzo nodded, eyes cutting quickly toward Amelia as if memorizing every line of her face. Adriano turned to Bruno, his voice dropping into a lethal growl. "And you? Find Rosa. Find the nanny who walked out without handing off my son's medication. Make her understand the consequences of almost killing the Russo heir." Bruno nodded, and a cold smile spread across his brutal face. "I'll be very creative, boss." Adriano nodded, then walked off the plane with the medical team, never looking back. Amelia stood there, watching the tall figure of the Mafia boss until he disappeared from sight, a strange feeling rising in her chest that she couldn't name. First class became oddly quiet after Adriano left. Then Harrison Cole stood up, walked to Amelia, and bowed his head deeply, shame plain on his face. "Miss Parker, I'm sorry. I said things I shouldn't have said. I judged you by your appearance without knowing who you really are. Please forgive me." Amelia said nothing, only gave a small nod. She didn't need his apology. She only needed to be left alone. But the apologies kept coming. Rachel stepped forward, took Amelia's hand, tears spilling. "You were incredible. I've never seen anyone stay that calm in a situation like that." Then a middle-aged woman from economy hurried up. Maria, a retired nurse, She wrapped Amelia in a hug as if she were holding her own daughter. I wanted to come help, but I was scared. I was scared of that man and his bodyguards. But you weren't scared of anything. You saved that boy while I just stood there. I'm ashamed of myself. In the middle of the apologies and gratitude, Bianca slipped past Amelia in silence. She paused for a single second, just long enough to lean close to Amelia's ear and whisper in a voice cold as ice. You think you've won? It's not over, dishwasher. It's not over. Then she walked away, her heels clicking on the cabin floor like the claws of a stalking animal. Amelia watched Bianca's back, a flicker of unease passing through her, but she pushed it aside. There were too many other things to worry about. Just then, a man around 40 stepped up and introduced himself as James Porter, a journalist with the New York Times, on his way to New York to cover an event. Miss Parker, I have to confess something, James said, his expression a mix of excitement and guilt. I recorded the whole thing, from the moment they humiliated you, to the moment your little girl spoke up, to the moment you saved that boy, all of it. Amelia looked at him, not yet able to react, but James kept going. Do you know who that man was? Adriano Russo, Il Diavolo, the most notorious mafia boss on the American East Coast, and you just saved his son on a plane after he threatened to have his bodyguard handle you. This is the story of the decade. Amelia stood frozen, the blood in her veins turning to ice. Mafia. A mafia boss. She'd just saved the son of a mafia boss, and he'd said he would find her. At Denver Children's Hospital, in the intensive care unit reserved for VIP patients, Leo lay on a pristine white bed, his small body connected to a heart monitor and an IV line. The screen showed stable vital signs now. His lips had turned pink again. His skin was no longer ash gray. He was sleeping deeply, breathing evenly, as if the nightmare on the plane had been nothing more than a bad dream that had passed. Adriano sat beside his son's bed, gray eyes never leaving Leo's peaceful face for even a second. He'd been sitting like that for 3 hours since they arrived, not eating, not drinking, not speaking to anyone, only watching his child and thinking. A soft knock sounded at the door, and Enzo stepped in with a thick file in his hands. Adriano didn't turn, but he signaled for Enzo to come closer. Report on Miss Parker, boss, Enzo said, his voice low and professional as always. I looked into everything you asked for. Adriano still didn't look at him, but he nodded for him to continue. Enzo opened the file and began to read. Amelia Rose Parker, 27 years old, currently living in East Los Angeles with her daughter, Chloe Parker, 4 years old, formerly a second-year student in UCLA's prestigious medical track on a full scholarship. She dropped out 5 years ago for personal reasons. She currently works 4 jobs: washing dishes at Denny's, cleaning offices, serving at a coffee shop, and working the night shift caring for the elderly at Sunset Nursing Home. Adriano closed his eyes. 4 jobs. That woman worked 4 jobs to raise her child, while he spent millions on lavish parties and hired dozens of people to care for a child whose medicine he didn't even know the name of. Continue, he said. The personal reason she left school was her marriage to Tyler Morrison, the son of the chairman of Morrison Holdings, Enzo said. He paused a moment before going on, his tone dropping. Court records show she was the victim of severe domestic abuse. Tyler Morrison beat her throughout the marriage, even while she was pregnant. She divorced him after Morrison slapped their 1-year-old daughter. She nearly lost custody because Morrison hired lawyers to frame her as mentally unstable. She won because a pro bono human rights attorney uncovered evidence of abuse. Adriano opened his eyes, and the gray in them darkened. He remembered what Bianca had said on the plane, the venomous insults aimed at the woman with calloused hands, and he hadn't stopped it. He'd even threatened to have Bruno handle her. He'd threatened a woman who'd survived abuse, who'd lived through hell, who was raising a child alone by working 4 crushing jobs. Anything else? Adriano asked, his voice rough. Yes, boss. And this is the most important part. Enzo flipped to the next page. Her father was Dr. William Parker, a pediatrician at Los Angeles County Hospital. He spent most of his career researching CAH, the same condition Leo has. He developed an early diagnostic protocol that could detect CAH in newborns for a cost of $12 per test, instead of the hundreds the current method costs. Adriano turned to look at Enzo for the first time, a strange light appearing in his eyes. Go on. 5 years ago, Dr. Parker applied for funding from the Harrington Foundation to complete the research and implement it widely in public hospitals. The application was denied. Enzo paused, eyes locked on Adriano. The stated reason in the records was the project had no commercial potential. Low cost meant low profit. The Harrington Foundation only funds research with revenue potential. The Harrington Foundation? Adriano repeated, eyes narrowing into sharp slits. Yes, boss. Harrington, as in Bianca Harrington. Enzo turned to the last page of the file, and this is a copy of the board meeting minutes from 5 years ago. Bianca Harrington, as a board member representing her family, voted to deny the funding and signed the decision rejecting Dr. Parker's application. Adriano took the paper from Enzo and stared at Bianca's signature beneath the words, "Deny funding." His hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a rage that was boiling through his veins. Bianca's family had refused to fund research that could have saved thousands of children with CA, including Leo, simply because it had no commercial potential. And the daughter of the man they'd rejected, the girl who'd lost her father while he worked himself to the bone without the resources to finish his research, that same girl had saved Adriano's son. And what had Adriano done? He'd stood there and let Bianca humiliate her. He'd called her that thing. He'd threatened to have Bruno handle her if she dared touch his child. He'd treated her like trash, like something unfit to exist in the space of rich people. Dr. Parker died 3 years ago of lung cancer, Enzo added, his tone softening. According to the hospital record, he died alone, with no family beside him. Miss Parker couldn't be there because her husband at the time forbade her from contacting her father. Adriano set the paper down and looked back at Leo, sleeping on the hospital bed. The boy looked so much like Serena. The same black curls, the same thin lips, the same small, delicate nose. For 3 years, Adriano hadn't been able to look at his son, because looking at him meant seeing Serena, remembering the loss that ripped him open, remembering the helplessness of standing outside the delivery room and being unable to save his wife. He dodged the responsibility of being a father by paying someone else to do it. He hadn't known his son's medication, hadn't known the signs of illness, hadn't known what his son feared or loved or dreamed about. He'd let a nanny quit for 4 days without checking who would care for the child. I almost killed my son with my indifference, Adriano whispered, his voice bitter. I'm the most powerful mafia boss in New York, but I'm a failed father. James Porter kept his word. Only 8 hours after the plane landed in Denver, his video was posted on the front page of the New York Times online and spread at a dizzying speed across every social media platform. 15 million views in the first 8 hours. A number even the most viral videos usually needed days to reach. The headline hit the upper class like a fist to the face. Mafia boss calls woman a common servant, then kneels begging her to save his child. The 17-minute video captured everything, from the moment Bianca began humiliating Amelia, to the moment Leo opened his eyes and whispered, "Papa," not missing a single detail. Viewers watched a young woman with calloused hands get called a dishwasher, get threatened with having a bodyguard handle, her get laughed at when she tried to warn them about Leo's condition. They also watched a 4-year-old girl clutching a torn, stuffed bear stand up with astonishing courage to face a mafia boss in order to save a child she'd never met. And they watched Adriano Russo, the notorious Il Diavolo, kneel down and beg the very woman he'd despised moments earlier. Hashtags appeared and spread like wildfire. Number Amelia Parker with millions of comments praising a poor woman's bravery and talent. Number Chloe the hero, honoring the 4-year-old who saw what all the wealthy adults overlooked. Number Bianca exposed, tearing back the Harrington heiress's mask. Alongside thousands of comments demanding boycotts of Harrington products and services. The whole world was talking about what happened on that flight, and Amelia Parker, a dishwasher from the East Los Angeles slums, suddenly became a hero in the eyes of millions. Amelia knew nothing about the storm raging online. After the plane continued from Denver to New York, she went to the hotel Johns Hopkins had booked for her and Chloe, a small but clean place near the conference venue. She bathed Chloe, fed her dinner, then put her to bed while she sat by the window looking out at the restless New York streets, her mind still spinning from everything that had happened. She'd saved the son of a mafia boss, and he'd said he'd find her. A knock came at 9 o'clock at night. Amelia startled, her heart beating faster as she moved to the door and looked through the peephole. The man standing outside was Adriano Russo, but not the Adriano Russo she'd seen on the plane. Bruno wasn't behind him. Enzo wasn't watching the hallway. There was no imposing entourage. He stood alone in the empty corridor, wearing a wrinkled white shirt and black slacks, no suit jacket, no tie, no expensive watch. His gray eyes were shadowed with sleeplessness, his sharp features etched with fatigue and exhaustion. He looked like an ordinary father who'd just survived the worst nightmare of his life, not a powerful mafia boss. Amelia opened the door and stood in the doorway without inviting him in. "How's Leo?" she asked, because that was the first thing she needed to know. "Stable. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery in a few days," Adriano answered, his voice low and tired. "I came to talk to you. Can I come in?" Amelia hesitated for a second, then stepped aside and let him enter. But she didn't close the door all the way. She kept a safe distance, arms folded across her chest, her gaze wary. Adriano looked around the small room, then looked at Chloe sleeping on the bed, the little girl hugging Honey Bear tight, her face peaceful as an angel's. "I know about your father," Adriano said, his eyes still on Chloe. "Dr. William Parker, a pediatrician at Los Angeles County Hospital, the man who spent his entire life researching CAH, the disease my son has." Amelia went rigid, not expecting he'd know that much. "And I also know about the Harrington Foundation," Adriano continued, turning to look at her, gray eyes heavy with remorse. 5 years ago, your father applied for funding to complete his research. They rejected it because the project had no commercial potential. Bianca Harrington sat on the board and signed that rejection. He paused and drew a deep breath, as if bracing for the hardest thing he'd ever had to say. "Bianca's family refused research that could have saved thousands of children, including my son. And the daughter of the man they rejected just saved my son's life. While I stood there and watched Bianca humiliate you, threaten you, treat you like trash." He bowed his head, and for the first time in Adriano Russo's life, he lowered his head to a woman who wasn't his mother. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything that happened on that plane. I'm sorry for what I said, for what I let others say. I'm sorry I didn't protect you when you deserved to be protected." Amelia stared at the man bowing his head before her, a notorious mafia boss, a man who killed without blinking, now bending himself small to apologize to a dishwasher. She could have accepted it, could have nodded and let it be over, but she didn't. "I don't need an apology," Amelia said, calm but unshakably firm. "An apology doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring my father back. It doesn't erase the years I was beaten. It doesn't give my daughter a normal childhood back." Adriano lifted his head, gray eyes on her with confusion. "Then what do you need? Money? I can give you any amount you want. A house? A car? Anything." "I need you to change," Amelia said, each word clear and solid. "Learn how to be a father. Know what medicine your son takes. Know what he's afraid of, what he likes, what he dreams about. Use your money to do good instead of evil. Fund the medical research the Harrington family rejected. Save the children you have the power to save." Adriano looked at her, and for the first time someone was speaking to his face like that. Without fear, without flattery, without calculation. This woman was different from everyone he'd ever met. "You're not afraid of me?" he asked, his voice threaded with disbelief and curiosity. "You know who I am. You know what I can do. Why aren't you afraid?" Amelia held his gray eyes without flinching, without trembling. "I've been afraid of a lot in my life. Afraid my husband would hit me. Afraid I'd lose my child. Afraid I wouldn't have money to buy milk. Afraid my child would get sick and I wouldn't have money for the hospital. I lived with fear for years." She paused for a second, then went on. "But afraid of you? No, you're not scary. You're just a bad father trying to find a way to make it right with his son." 2 days after the meeting at the hotel, Johns Hopkins International Medical Conference officially opened at the Manhattan Conference Center. More than 500 doctors, researchers, and medical experts from around the world gathered to hear the newest work in pediatrics. But before Amelia had a chance to step onto the stage and present her father's research, James Porter dropped a second bomb. He stood before hundreds of journalists at a press conference held right in the main lobby of the conference center. And he revealed a set of confidential documents he'd collected over the past 48 hours. There was a copy of Dr. William Parker's funding application to the Harrington Foundation from 5 years earlier, along with the board review minutes bearing Bianca Harrington's signature directly beneath the words, "Funding denied." There were internal Harrington Foundation emails stating the reason for rejection. The project has no commercial potential. A $12 testing cost is too low to generate meaningful profit. And there was a comparison between what the Harrington Foundation had spent on flashy charity galas over the past 5 years, more than $50 million, versus what they'd refused to fund for Dr. Parker, only $300,000. The scandal erupted like a volcano. The hashtag Harrington Scandal climbed to #1 trending worldwide in only a few hours. Shares of companies under the Harrington conglomerate plunged, losing more than 20% of their value in a single trading day. Marcus Harrington, Bianca's father, was forced to call an emergency press conference to apologize to the public, but his apology only poured fuel on the fire when he tried to justify it as a reasonable business decision. In the middle of the storm, Bianca Harrington vanished from all public events. She hid inside her penthouse on the Upper East Side, refused every interview, and locked down every social media account. But there was one person she couldn't refuse to see. Adriano Russo showed up at the door of Bianca's penthouse at 10 o'clock at night, uninvited, unannounced. Bruno stood guard in the hallway, making sure no one came in or out until his boss allowed it. Bianca opened the door with swollen eyes from crying, and a bare face that made her look a decade older. She started to say something, maybe to beg, maybe to explain, but Adriano walked in and slammed the door before she could get a word out. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice cold as ice, his gray eyes stripped of any warmth he'd shown when he spoke to Amelia. Bianca sat on the sofa, shaking. She'd seen Adriano angry before, but she'd never seen him like this. This wasn't a loud, burning rage. This was cold, measured anger, the kind Adriano reserved for enemies he'd already decided to destroy. "Your family denied funding for research that could have saved my son," Adriano began, each word dropping like heavy stones. "What was your reason?" "No commercial potential. Not enough profit. $300,000, the amount your father spends on a birthday party, and you denied it because it didn't pay." He stepped closer, towering over Bianca like death's shadow. "Then on the plane, you blocked the only person who could save my son. You ripped the medical kit out of her hands. You screamed that she'd kill Leo. If she'd listened to you, if she'd stepped back, my son would have died." Bianca started crying, tears streaming down her face. "Adriano, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I only wanted—" "Stop," Adriano cut her off, his voice not raised, yet heavy enough to seal Bianca's mouth instantly. "I don't care what you wanted. I care what you did, and now you'll pay." He set a sheet of paper on the table in front of her. "Your family leaves New York for good. Sell all your real estate, shut down your offices, disappear from this city within 30 days. The Harrington Foundation donates $20 million to the Dr. William Parker Fund, a rare pediatric disease research fund that I'll establish." Bianca stared at the paper, eyes wide with horror. $20 million. "Adriano, my father will never—" "Or," Adriano interrupted, his voice lowering into a whisper that was even more terrifying than a roar. "I'll show you why people call me the devil. You know what I can do. You know how the people who've offended me ended up. Do you want your family floating in the Hudson River?" Bianca collapsed completely, folding into the sofa, sobbing like a child. All the arrogance, all the venom, all the cold, ruthless polish fell away, leaving only a woman afraid to the bone. "I'll do it. I'll tell my father. Please, Adriano, don't hurt my family." 30 days later, the Harrington family sold the Upper East Side penthouse and moved to Los Angeles. The Harrington Foundation announced a donation of $20 million to the Dr. William Parker Fund, with the official explanation that it was in memory of a great researcher who devoted his entire life to medicine. Bianca Harrington never appeared in New York again. 2 months later, when things had gradually settled, when Amelia had begun a new life in New York with Chloe, a ghost from the past suddenly appeared. Tyler Morrison was waiting outside Amelia's apartment when she brought Chloe home from preschool. He looked more wrecked than the last time she'd seen him, stubble on his jaw, eyes bloodshot from alcohol. But the smug cruelty hadn't changed at all. "Amelia, sweetheart," Tyler grinned, blocking Amelia and Chloe. "I see you're famous now. A multi-million-view video, protected by a Mafia boss. Must be a lot of money, huh? I think it's time we talk about sharing." Chloe hid behind her mother in fear. She still remembered this man. Still remembered the nights her mother cried after being hit. Still remembered the slap that had left her cheek swollen when she was 1 year old. "You've got no rights here, Tyler," Amelia said, her voice trembling even as she tried to hold it steady. "The court's decided. Walk away." Tyler stepped closer, his hand reaching to grab Amelia's arm. But he never got to touch her. A hand as big as a fan clamped around Tyler's wrist and twisted it back with a sickening crack. Bruno stood there like a wall of flesh, cold eyes looking at Tyler the way you'd look at an insect. "The boss wants to see you," Bruno said, and he dragged Tyler away like a dog, not caring about Tyler's screams of pain. That night, in an abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, Tyler Morrison knelt in front of Adriano Russo, his face swollen from a few warm-up punches from Bruno. "You hit your wife," Adriano said, his voice cold as ice. "You hit your child. You turned their lives into hell. Now you've got two choices. Disappear from the United States forever, or disappear from the earth forever. You've got 30 seconds to decide." Tyler Morrison was put on a plane to Brazil that same night, with a warning that if he ever set foot in the United States again, the next thing he'd see would be the bottom of the Hudson River. 1 week after the night Tyler Morrison was put on a plane and forced out of the United States, Amelia stood in the wings behind the main auditorium at the Johns Hopkins Conference Center, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might leap out of her chest. She looked down at the elegant navy blue dress Dr. Catherine Wells had given her the morning before, along with a note that said, "You deserve to shine, Amelia. Your father would be so proud." The dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been tailored just for her. And for the first time in years, Amelia felt beautiful. Not the beauty of expensive clothes, but the beauty of a woman who'd walked through hell and was still standing. Around her neck, her father's silver stethoscope rested quietly. The words, "Heal with love." Dad catching the backstage light like a blessing from the dead. She drew a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. 500 people filled the hall. Doctors, researchers, medical professors from all over the world, all of them turning their eyes toward the 27-year-old woman with calloused hands and the story that had shaken all of America. Amelia walked to the podium, searching the crowd until she spotted Chloe in the very first row beside Dr. Wells. Chloe waved at her mother, blue eyes glittering with pride. Honey Bear placed neatly on her lap like an honored guest. Amelia smiled at her daughter, then began the presentation she'd prepared her whole life to give. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amelia Parker, and today I want to share with you the research my father, Dr. William Parker, devoted his entire life to completing." Her voice rang clear and steady through the silent hall. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, affects approximately 1 in 15,000 newborns worldwide. If it isn't detected early, this disease can be fatal within the first weeks of life. Current diagnostic methods cost hundreds of dollars per test, making them a luxury for public hospitals and low-income families. My father spent 20 years developing an early screening protocol that is simpler, more accurate, and most importantly, cheaper. Amelia advanced the slide, and an image of Dr. William Parker in a white coat appeared on the giant screen behind her. She had to pause for a second to steady her emotions before she went on. "The protocol my father developed costs $12 per test. $12 to save a life. At this cost, every public hospital, every small clinic, every rural health station can screen newborns for CAH. We can save thousands, tens of thousands of children every year." She continued into the technical details over the next 45 minutes, from each testing step to the process for reading results, from accuracy to comparative studies against the traditional method. The audience listened in silence, and now and then, a murmur of admiration swept through as Amelia laid out the striking data. When she reached the final slide, Amelia stopped. On the screen, large words appeared. Co-authors, Amelia R. Parker and Dr. William Parker, in memoriam. "Heal with love." She looked up at her father's image, eyes burning as she fought back tears. "My father isn't alive to see today. He died 3 years ago, alone in a hospital, without his daughter beside him for reasons I don't want to mention. But before he died, he left me a message through the night nurse on duty. Live, Mia. Never stop healing." Amelia drew a deep breath. "Today, I'm standing here to fulfill my father's last wish. Heal with love. That's the philosophy he lived by and died for. And I hope this research will carry his legacy forward, saving the children he spent his whole life trying to protect." The hall erupted in applause, but before Amelia could step away from the podium, the doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Adriano Russo walked in, but not the Adriano in a powerful black Armani suit like on the plane. He wore a simple light blue shirt, and he was holding Leo's hand as the boy took small, unsteady steps beside him. Leo had fully recovered, cheeks rosy, eyes bright, nothing like the dying child Amelia had saved on that plane 2 weeks earlier. Adriano led Leo down the aisle through the crowd as every head turned to watch. When they reached the stage, Adriano stepped up and stood beside Amelia under hundreds of curious eyes. "Sorry to interrupt," Adriano said into the microphone, his deep voice carrying across the hall. "But I have an important announcement." He turned to look at Amelia, gray eyes far warmer than they'd been the first time they met. 2 weeks ago, my son nearly died on a flight because I was a bad father. I didn't know what disease my child had. I didn't know what medicine he took. And the person who saved my son was the woman standing beside me, the woman I treated badly, the woman I called a dismissed, as nothing more than a kitchen hand. The hall went still, not a sound. To show my gratitude, and to carry on the legacy of Dr. William Parker, I'm announcing the creation of the Dr. William Parker Fund, with an initial donation of $10 million. This fund will support research into rare diseases in children and provide free CAH testing for every public hospital in the United States. The hall exploded with applause and cheering, but Amelia didn't hear any of it. She only watched Leo run down the steps toward the front row. "Sister, sister," he called to Chloe in a bright, clear voice, small hands reaching out. Chloe hopped down from her seat and ran to hug Leo, the two children wrapping their arms around each other in the middle of the hall, as if they'd been best friends in a past life. Amelia stood on the stage and finally let the tears spill. But these weren't tears of misery, of despair, of nights being beaten or days without money to buy milk. These were tears of happiness, and for the first time in years, she was crying because she was glad. She looked up at the screen where her father's image still shone with that gentle smile. "I did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never stopped healing." 6 months after the historic presentation at Johns Hopkins, Amelia Parker's life had changed completely, in a way she'd never dared to dream. She officially became a Johns Hopkins medical student on a full scholarship, returning to the path she'd been forced to abandon 5 years earlier. She and Chloe moved into a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in Baltimore. No more damp, moldy walls, no more leaking pipes, no more ambulance sirens wailing all night. Chloe had her own room with a pink princess bed and a bookshelf packed with comic books, and Honey Bear was placed in pride of place on her pillow, like an honored guest. Dr. William Parker's research had been implemented at more than 30 public hospitals across the United States, saving hundreds of newborns with CAH in only half a year. Her father's legacy no longer lay silent on handwritten pages. It had become real, breathing, living, saving lives every day. But the biggest change didn't come from Amelia. It came from the man she'd once believed could never change. At 5 o'clock every morning, before the sun showed itself on New York's horizon, Adriano Russo woke up and walked into his son's room. He opened the medicine cabinet and took out 2 bottles whose labels he now knew by heart: hydrocortisone and fludrocortisone. He read the dosage one more time, even though he'd read it hundreds of times, carefully measured the exact milligrams Leo needed, mixed it with the apple juice Leo liked, then gently woke his son. "Here's your medicine, Leo," Adriano said, his voice soft in a way he'd never known he was capable of. "Thank you, Papa," Leo replied, brown eyes still sleepy but his smile bright, and after he drank every drop, he wrapped his arms around his father's neck. For the first time in the 3 years since Serena died, Adriano Russo was truly a father. He knew what his son liked to eat, what he feared, what he dreamed about. He knew Leo loved the color blue, was afraid of thunder, and dreamed of one day seeing big sister Chloe again. He was present for every breakfast, read stories every night, and he never let anyone else give Leo his medicine again. Adriano's work changed too, slowly, over time. He began pulling back from illegal operations and shifting investments into healthcare and education. The casinos were still there, but fewer. The loan sharking was still there, but with lower interest and no more violence in collections. Il Diavolo was still a name the underworld of New York feared, but now that fear came with a respect for a boss trying to change. Amelia and Adriano saw each other often during those 6 months, sometimes in New York, sometimes in Baltimore. But they didn't rush, and they didn't make it easy. Each meeting became a long conversation, about life, about their children, about the past and the future. "You're still Mafia," Amelia said once, her voice not harsh but not yielding. "I'm changing." "Every day," Adriano answered, gray eyes on her with a sincerity she'd never seen in anyone. "We'll see," she said, but the corner of her mouth had already lifted into a small smile. 1 year after the fateful flight, everything was different. Chloe and Leo were close, like real siblings. The 5-year-old always protecting the 4-year-old as if it were the most sacred mission of her life. Amelia and Adriano officially began dating. Slowly and carefully. The way a woman who'd been hurt learns how to trust again. The way a mafia boss learns how to truly love. And then came the day they boarded a first-class flight together from Los Angeles to New York. The same route as a year before, the same airline, the same departure time. When Rachel, the Puerto Rican flight attendant, saw Amelia enter first class, her eyes lit up with joy. "Miss Parker, it's an honor to serve you again." Amelia smiled, nodded to Rachel, and led Chloe to row 4, the same seats as that year. Adriano and Leo sat in row 2, also the same seats, but this time there was no Bruno standing guard, no Enzo watching every face, only a father and son laughing together. Chloe and Leo quickly sat beside each other and shared an iPad to watch cartoons, their bright laughter filling first class like a song of happiness. When the plane took off, Adriano left his seat and came to sit beside Amelia. He took her hand, the work-worn hand he now thought was the most beautiful hand in the world. "A year ago, I called you a dishwasher," Adriano said, his voice low and full of feeling. "I remember," Amelia answered, brown eyes on him with none of the old wariness. "And now you're the most important person in my life. You and Chloe gave me a second chance. You taught me how to be a father, how to be human. I don't deserve you, but I'll spend my whole life trying to become someone who does." Amelia didn't answer. She only smiled and turned to look out the window. The sky was a deep, endless blue, soft white clouds drifting beneath the wings. She raised her hand to the silver stethoscope still around her neck, fingertips brushing the engraved words she knew by heart. "Heal with love, Dad," she whispered, eyes lifted to the sky as if she were speaking to her father. "I lived, Dad. I never stopped healing, and I found happiness." The circle had closed. The poor girl with calloused hands had become a future doctor. The cold mafia boss had learned how to love. 2 children from 2 different worlds had become brother and sister, and on a first-class flight beneath a vast blue sky, 4 people had found each other, found a family, found the meaning of life. This story brings us many precious lessons about life. Never judge a person by appearances, because calloused hands can be hands that save lives, and an old dress can shelter a great heart. Never give up on your dreams, no matter how cruel life becomes, because light is always waiting at the end of the tunnel. And most importantly, remember that money and power can't buy love. Only real change from the heart can heal wounds and build true happiness. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button on our channel, press like, and share this video so more people can hear meaningful stories every day. We'd love to know how you felt about this story. Did it remind you of anything in your real life? Please leave a comment below so we can listen to your honest feelings from deep in your heart. Thank you sincerely for staying with us until the very end. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, peace, and happiness every day. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, if you don't give up, the light will come. Heal with love. Heal with love. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.